Good morning. It is Sunday, October the 2nd, about 11:15 a.m. This is Shay Gibson with Wind Alert bringing you a Tropics update. So we continue to watch Major Hurricane Matthew in the Central Caribbean. It is still a Category 4 storm with winds of 140 miles per hour. As of the 11 o'clock a.m. update, the winds have dropped from 8 o'clock a.m. from 150 miles per hour down to 140 miles per hour. However, the pressure is holding at 947 millibars as it undergoes a little bit of eye wall restructuring. We'll get into that in just a minute. The general movement right now is it's oscillating a little bit to the west at about 3 miles per hour. It was going northwest earlier, and we do expect that the track will continue back on its northwest to northerly turn in time. In fact, if we look at the National Hurricane Center future track for the system, we see that it has migrated a little bit to the east, which puts western Hispaniola in the crosshairs for more of the brunt of this system. Also, eastern Cuba will also feel the effects. Jamaica, for the most part, looks like it could skirt getting some of those stronger winds in the stronger portion of the system, which is good because the eastern side of Jamaica contains Kingston and the higher populated areas. So that could be a good thing for them. Either way, it looks like all these islands are under hurricane warnings on some sides of them, especially all of Haiti, all of coastal Haiti, eastern Cuba, all of Jamaica under hurricane warnings. It looks like they are going to have deteriorating conditions over the next 24 to 48 hours as the system makes its way to the north. So here we are looking at our wind alert storm tracker. We can see which islands are affected. We have Haiti, all of coastal Haiti. We have all of Jamaica under hurricane warning. We have all of eastern Cuba and portions of central Cuba with hurricane watches. We also have hurricane watches in effect for Turks and Caicos and some of the southern Bahama islands. And so these islands all need to be watching this very closely. You notice that it keeps it at a major hurricane status as it goes through Cuba, and the reasoning is because it looks like the center may stay over water versus being placed over the mountainous zones of eastern Cuba, which would weaken it. Looks like it could hold major status if it just threads the loop just a little bit through these islands. It looks like it could get very lucky and hold major hurricane status, but that's also not very lucky for the islands in its way and also into the Bahamas. We do see some weakening phases down the road. Could be due to some cooler northeast air, drier air injection. So we're going to be looking at that down the road. Nothing's for certain right now, and as we get 4 to 5 days out, things really are still uncertain at this point. We're also looking at the east coast, the southeast region for possible skirting from this system. Nothing's definite yet, and we'll talk about that in just a little bit. But if we look at what's going on in the center, this is microwave imagery from this morning to today, and we can see the eye wall fairly strong on the northeastern side. And then as we get through the last frames, we see that the western side and the southern side sort of collapsed a little bit, and looks like it's going through an eye wall restructuring phase where it could be replacing the eye wall altogether, and then it could re-strengthen again. So it's not over. It's not supposed to weaken very much. In fact, it could re-strengthen again. If we look at the total cyclonic heat potential for the area, it's just now moving over these warmer waters that I talked about in the last couple of discussions, where these very warmer, deeper waters exist, and this is also an additional source of fuel for it as it continues over the warmer waters. It's about 30 to 31 degrees Celsius, which is about 86 to almost 88 degrees. So very, very warm waters there, and also very deep warm waters for fuel. It won't just come across and scrape the top off with cool water upwelling. It'll just continue to have some warm water available to it for its longevity through its track through that area. So if we look at Hurricane Recon is in right now, we're finding very strong winds all the way around. We see very major hurricane force winds around the center. We see that westerly jog right here, almost due west-southwest just a little bit in this area. So it'll be interesting to see how the system makes its way back towards the north. If it doesn't go a little bit further to the west today, it could still jog a little bit further west, which may change the track guidance for it. But for right now, we'll continue this to start to lift up to the northwest and the north in time. You can see that the strong hurricane force winds still do extend pretty far out around it. We're still looking at 64 to 83 knots extended pretty far out along the eye wall. Now if we look at the water vapor imagery for this area, there was a large pocket of drier air up ahead of it to the north, to the west, and to the northwest, and it looks like some of this outflow and some relaxing of the shear that was aloft at west-southwest and westerly shear that was going on with this has sort of relaxed, and it's not very much of a problem anymore. So the outflow is pushing moisture out into this environment, which is saturating it where the dry air was. It's now saturating that environment, which means that the system is going to become more enveloped inside of its own moisture shield in time, and this is where it's moving over those warmer waters. So we could see re-intensification back up to a very strong Category 4, if not a Category 5 again. So we just have to watch for that. We also see this trough that's thinning out up here to its northwest, and it looks like this could pinch off to a very weak upper low, which could drift down to the southwest over Mexico or over to Central American areas, and then that would weaken this trough. So we're also watching this ridge right here building in, and this is what we think could give this system a little bit of a nudge over to this direction in time. There's also a couple of other features, but it looks like there's going to become an avenue once it goes in this direction to sort of bend in towards the southeast coast, and from there it gets a little bit uncertain, but we'll definitely look at that here in just a minute. Latest 72 hours, we can see that total precipitable water that I was talking about with that moisture shield enveloping. You can see where the dry air was earlier in its life a couple days ago, and you can see the dry air is now being saturated all along this area to the northwest of the system. So it's pretty much enveloping the central to western Caribbean in its own moisture shield. Let's take a look at the intensity charts through the next 108 to 120 hours. All of the models pretty much keep this at a category 3 or higher, so we are expecting category or major hurricane status through the next 120 hours at least. Some of the models do bring it back. The UK brings it back up to category 5 status. We can't rule that out either. Let's take a quick look at the tracks for the system. We can see now at the 12 o'clock the tracks have pretty wide berth. So we have to remember one thing about these models. When we get to about 4 days out, the error is about 175 miles from the center of the National Hurricane Center's track guidance, and then as we get to 5 days, it's about 233 miles of an error in judgment. So beyond this point right here, 96 to 120, it's very uncertain. We'll have to watch to see if it takes a more westerly track. Eastern Florida is not out of the loop on this yet, and neither are the Outer Banks, North Carolina. Even though there's a lot of trending for this to hook out to sea, we still can't rule that out because of the uncertainty at this point right here. And this really depends on a few things going on across the United States. So we have this upper low right here in the Great Lakes. This was earlier forecast to drop down by the Euro and hold as a stronger upper low, which would have pulled the system immediately out. But what we're finding is that it actually goes a little bit more east and then weakens and flattens out into just a thin trough as high pressure is building down from Canada right now. This high is going to build down into this area and bring a northeast wedge down the coastline. At the same time, we have this ridge building out here in the Atlantic, and this is going to be providing this flow right here, this southerly flow, southeast, all the way into the coastal United States. And we have this trough right here, and so we have a system that's lifting up from Cuba, and so we have an area where this could get nudged into the coastline with this high pressure pulling down this way northeast, and the ridge out here pushing in from the southeast as well. That's where that nudge comes in the track, and that's why Eastern Florida is not out of the loop yet. To what extent, if this ridge builds stronger, it could give it more of a nudge into the coastline, in which case South Carolina and North Carolina need to be looking out for the system and really monitoring very closely. Whereas if we do get this high pressure drop down, we're also looking at another trough setup coming across the country. So more traffic coming across that could have its effects after 4 to 5 days. So several things to watch there. Let's go ahead and take a look at the model guidance. Here is the GFS. This is the 10-meter vorticity where it shows the winds at the surface. And here's what this does with the system. You can see it brings it up through in between Hispaniola and Jamaica and across eastern Cuba, and then we can see that ridge building. Here's the ridge right here. We can see the ridge building in with those southeasterly winds. We can also see those east-northeasterly winds building down from the north of that Canadian high. And so the GFS is reading on this, and it's saying, oh yeah, it's going to get a push in towards the coastline. So that's where we get that nudge in towards the southeast. So we have to be watching this model very closely. It's been very, very consistent on a daily basis with this sort of scenario going on. Now if we look at the Euro, we'll take a look at the same mapping from this. We can see that it does almost the same thing through the islands down in Cuba and Hispaniola and then up through the Bahamas, and it also builds that ridge as well. So it's reading this ridge out this direction with these southeast winds. It also sees that same east-northeast wedge coming down from the north, and it gives it that nudge in towards the coastline, very close to South Carolina and then to North Carolina, and then hooks it out to sea. So now with the Euro, this is last night's Euro model. We'll also have another one coming out at 12 p.m. today. It will probably show up at around 2:30 to 3 o'clock this afternoon to see what the latest guidance is. But when those two are in agreement with this scenario, I think the southeast region really needs to be watching the system closely. We're talking still 4 to 5 days out and even 6 days out. So a lot of things can happen between now and then. If we take a look at the GFS 500 millibar, some of the other guidance for this we can see the ridge building out here in the Atlantic. This is called a Bermuda High. And as we go in time, watch what this does. It sort of fades out. We have a trough over here off of the southeast region, and then that fades. And as the storm comes up through the area, you see the ridge building from the north which is this Canadian high, and then we have this ridge here in the Atlantic, the Bermuda high, and then we see that the system is guided in towards the coastline due to those two features. It looked like maybe that upper low would hang around up here to the northeast a little bit, and then it would be able to pull the storm out. But it looks like that may fade. So the euro, if we take a look at the same thing with the euro, we see that the Atlantic ridge, the Bermuda high, stays in place. We see that same troughing going on. Whoops, I'm sorry. You know what? This is the GFS. Let me back up to the euro and start over on that one. My apologies. We see that same upper trough head to the east, the same ridge, the same trough down in the southeast, and then we have that upper ridge building from the north and ridge building in from the east out in the Atlantic. And this is another reason why at least the 500 millibar chart also shows the pattern for that. One thing we're going to be watching very closely is the timing of this trough right here, because if this comes in a little bit faster with an upper low coming across Canada and northern United States, this could pull the system away quicker. So it's going to be a timing thing, and it's really hard to decide right now whether or not we need to really be preparing for that in the southeast region. I think we need to be watching it very closely, and in fact, I think no matter what, we're going to see some pretty strong winds along the coastline. Even if we do get a skirting by it, we still could see hurricane force winds along the coast. Even if there's no direct impact, doesn't mean we can't even see strong tropical storm force winds with those effects. If we look at the GFS, we can see that northeast wedge set up. Even days out ahead of the system, we see that the winds are already turning on from the northeast along the southeast and Georgia coast, just because of the outwards gradient in the wind field from this system interacting with high pressure to the north coming down. So that's one thing to think about. We're talking about Tuesday, Wednesday, you'll start to see the winds come up along the coastline if this scenario is correct, and then those winds will continue to increase day to day to day if the system is going to be approaching the coast. So I think that's going to do it for this report. The potential right now, if we look back at the tracks as a recap, let's take a look back at these tracks, and these will be updated again at 6 o'clock p.m. The Euro model will be out at 12, but it will not initialize until a little after that and won't be fully viewable until about 2:30 or 3 o'clock p.m. and we'll have a better idea then. These tracks will be updated. Look for the National Hurricane Center at 2 p.m. and 5 p.m. for those updates, and then also at 8 o'clock p.m. tonight. Until next time, thanks for watching and take care.